But one of the problems that I've seen over the years, which is difficult, I don't know how this sort of addresses it in that situation where you have a marriage of short duration, so there might be some alimony up front for maybe a few years, and then the alimony stops, but the kids are still maybe 15 more years of child support. So what would happen at that point?
Well, the child support guidelines and our law are really designed to change child support several times over the life of a child. When daycare goes up, child support goes up. When daycare goes down, child support goes down. When alimony stops, child support should go down. So that's why it's important that it be relatively simple, because we're kind of suggesting that parents go into court 4 or 5 times sometimes through the various stages of their child's life. So the simple answer is, if spousal maintenance stops, that's often a time to review the child support.
Okay, that's good. Although some of the things I've seen over the years, it seems to me that with couples, it's hard. Is they get a child support number and they can go in for a modification or changes, and they don't. They sort of get locked into the initial number. Is that your experience?
It is one of the hardest cases I get. When I get people, mom or dad, if the mom comes in and dad owes $40,000 and she's never gone in to enforce it, and you go in and you get a good child support order, he owes so much that sometimes he hits the road. He starts working under the table.
He's on the milk carton.
Right. And likewise, if the dad who should have got his child support lowered years ago comes in, the law is very harsh. You can't retroactively modify it. Although what we can do, if the money is not owed to the state, is we can try to offer a compromise. If mom's owed $30,000 and dad can put $10,000 on a charge card or come up with a compromised amount, I often suggest, let's try to see if she'll take $10,000, waive the $20,000, and then we start fresh. And a lot of times the moms might do that because they, a bird in the hand is worth more, and she wants to get those regular child support payments going. But those are tough cases. Those are very tough cases.
You said credit cards. Can you put it on? Can you put child support on a credit card and get the mileage?
No, you can get a cash payment deposited to the clearinghouse if you have that availability. But as you may know, credit is becoming much less available now. We used to do a lot of things on credit cards, and a lot of people just don't have that cash availability now.
Let me tell you, actually, one of my favorite collection stories was this man owed about $200,000 in back child support, and he finally got a job working for his son. The wife caught up him and garnished his back pay for the child support, which was actually for the son he was working for, if you can follow that.
Yes, I've had some of those cases.
I found that somewhat amusing that, the son was actually paying his own child support.
One of my good stories is to always ask your client to make sure they don't have a lot of cash in their pocket. I had a client that kept crying broke, and after about the 4th review hearing, the judge asked him to take the money he had out of his pocket, and he had like $1,200 in his pocket when he said that he didn't have a dollar to his name. And of course, the judge made him turn that $1,200 in and made me look a little foolish.
We talked about the guidelines, but this is a phenomenon, I guess it must be the last 20, 25 years, child support guidelines. What prompted them and who requires them?
The child support guidelines actually stem from Section 4D of the Social Security Act. It started in the mid-70s, and it has grown and grown and grown. In the late 80s, they required of the states, in order to keep getting federal money, that they all have mandatory numerical guidelines. So all states now have to have guidelines that result in a specific number for most families. They have to have wage assignments. So most of this is coming from federal law that tells the state you need to pass these laws. And Arizona has passed the laws that they've been required to pass by federal law.
And I think you mentioned earlier, you're on the committee that's actually preparing the new ones, which are going into effect.
Well, yes, part of the federal mandate is that the guidelines be reviewed every 4 years, and so yes, I am on the committee for this 4-year review, and the effective date of the new guidelines has kept being put off. Right now it is September of 2010, but there is still, it's almost like a piece of law. We have to go back before the Supreme Court, we have to continue to get input from the state bar, from custodial parents, all those people that have an interest in it. And there has been a lot of feedback. I'm not sure that we're done changing them yet, because they are big, they're new, they're very different, and a lot of people are giving us feedback about them.
How does that work too, in terms of, all these people have gotten divorced 2 or 3 years ago, now the new child support guidelines, how does that work? Are they Are they under the old ones, under the new ones?
Well, that's a good question. Part of the concern that I have, and I've expressed this on the committee, and I speak only for myself as a private lawyer, is that when you do have big changes like this, suddenly a lot of people want to change their child support. And on the committee, we even discussed, well, maybe we should only make it go up 50% of the new amount or 75%. We rejected that idea, but realistically, it may be that the day these new guidelines get passed, some moms are going to be entitled to $300 or $400 more a month. Some dads are going to have to start paying that.
What's the mechanics of that going to be? I mean, you're under the old child support guidelines change. You know, they've been paying so much money under certain procedure. What do they do?
Nothing happens automatically. So for anybody out there thinking that they need to raise or lower their child support based on the new law, if it gets passed, or based on changes in their circumstances, they need to file, either by filing their own paperwork or by hiring a lawyer, or by contacting the Attorney General's office, Child Support Enforcement, and they can file papers. They're not quite your lawyer, but they can assist you in filing those papers.
Is this something that people can do on their own? Or
I believe so, especially if there are two wage earners. If it's somebody self-employed, it gets much more complicated because then you get into profit and loss statements, what's a legitimate write-off, and things like that. But if you have a guy working for a wage and a gal working for a wage, it's pretty easy to do a modification of child support on your own.
Well, let's take the harder example. What happens if you aren't? That's always the tough situation. The person who's in a cash business showing that. What happens?
Those cases can get very complicated, and people can spend more money than the raise is worth. So as a lawyer, I always try to be cost-benefit wise with my clients. But, you know, a lot of people have not very good books. Some people do have illegitimate write-offs. Some people take a lot of cash under the table. And that's hard to prove. You have to get bank deposits, receipts from customers. I've had cases where the lawyer wanted to contact every customer to have them list the payments. It can be complicated, and you have to be careful about how much you fight about that, because the battle can be more expensive than what you stand to win or lose sometimes.
Is that going to be an IRS situation where all of a sudden there's unreported income and the people are not really having a problem with the child support or have the IRS after them?
It is definitely, any divorce lawyer has had cases where the parties have owned a family business or dad's had the business and the mom says, well, we have cash income that we never reported and I want to use that for purposes of child support. And you're like, well, you signed those tax returns too. Those can be touchy situations, but theoretically, income should be declared on your tax returns. You can't have it one way for tax purposes and yet for child support another way.
We've talked about what the child support is, but my understanding is you can also deviate from these child support guidelines. Can you tell us a little bit about deviation?
You can deviate. According to the guidelines, both new and old, if there are exceptional circumstances, the court can deviate. Generally, we want the same thing to happen in most households. One of the things I need to mention now, though, is if the new guidelines are passed, especially in these cases with a low-income single mom and a high-income dad where he's going to pay a lot more money, it got brought up in the committee, well, what if on paper she's low income, but she's married to a wealthy man, for example, and he's making $10,000. So we're
This is a second marriage mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, right now the guidelines say his income's not included. But the committee decided that it would not be fair to treat that mom the same as a single mom. And so we have changed the guidelines, and they do say that regular and recurring gifts or payments can now be considered. This is going to open up, in my opinion, more temptation towards litigation. One of the lawyers said to me, well, it'll make us busy, but now it is going to be possible, if they pass the new guidelines, to bring in the rich new husband's income in order to deviate from the guidelines.
I think you've described it. I want you to tell us a little bit more about some of the differences in the guidelines of this one. But why, that's unusual for a state to change the model and formula this dramatically, it seems to me.
It is pretty dramatically.
What caused that this time?
I believe about 38 of the states use what we call the income shared model. But there has been, I think, scientific studies have shown that this is really not helping single moms, moms with lower incomes. And there is a temptation to have the higher income dad pay more income. So in looking at these studies and in really looking at outcome-based studies, a lot of the numbers suggest that it's not fair from almost a gut level.